we live in a world that is obsessed with fixing broken people. We see that in our public systems, medicalizing, pathologizing, labeling, diagnosing, and then developing interventions to fix people who are broken. My orientation is that is our public systems that are broken, and that our public systems, including our healthcare system, are failing a number of people in our city and in our province. And so I'd like to start with a very quick story about a young man named Jeff. Jeff was raised in Calgary. When he was very young, toddler age, his family hit the news in a very terrifying and horrific way because he was severely abused in his home at the hands of his parents. The media picked up on the story, and there was an outpouring of support from Calgarians because of the terrible treatment that Jeff had received. We were outraged, and I remember this, having been born and raised here in Calgary. We were outraged that such terrible things could happen to such an innocent young child. And so Jeff was taken from his family. His parents were charged. Fast forward 20 years, and Jeff is in one of our emergency shelters here in Calgary. And Jeff's question was, when did people stop caring? Was it when I turned 18? Was it when I took my first drink? Was it my first night in shelter? Was it my 50th night in shelter? He was concerned because, having gone back and looking at those stories from 20 years earlier, he was very surprised by the support that Calgarians showed in his story, and felt completely abandoned and lost and couldn't figure out when that switch happened. So I tell that story for a few reasons. One, Jeff and the people like Jeff that I've met are the reason that I do this work and the way that I do it. But it's also important that as we talk about statistics and research that we're going to talk about today, we need to remember that we're talking about real people, people like Jeff. And I think it's also important for Calgarians to recognize that there are lots of Jeffs in our city. So one of the big gaps that we see in our continuum of services in our city and in our province is access to treatment programs. And so we know that people are suffering and struggling with substance use issues, and oftentimes they want support. And the step to get support is often 3 days in detox with a 6-month wait list to get into a treatment program. So expanding access to treatment programs would be a major intervention. I think it's important to note that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but we know that housing works for everyone, and so we see a reduction in crime, we see a reduction in inappropriate hospital usage, EMS usage, police interventions when people have access to safe and supportive housing. We need to recognize that the housing and support programs need to be different based on what people need, and our study showed high rates of childhood trauma, and so we need to be really mindful and responsive to that trauma as part of our intervention.